Good morning. The students who grew up on my street and in my neighborhood in Iowa City, Iowa, love football. We mostly loved our beloved hometown Iowa Hawkeyes, but we also loved the NFL. However, because there wasn't a pro team in Iowa, we had to cheer for teams in the surrounding area like the Minnesota Vikings, the Chicago Bears, or the Green Bay Packers. I myself was partial to the Packers. Maybe it was because their quarterback Bart Starr had a pretty cool name. I also thought the green and gold trim on their uniforms was pretty spiffy, and it matched up well with the colors of my high school letter jacket at West High. But I think the thing that I liked most about the Packers was that they were tough. Win or lose, week in or week out, you always knew that the Packers were going to leave it all out on the field for their teammates and for their fans. Now, this ethic of toughness was instilled many years prior by their legendary coach, Vince Lombardi, who famously said, "The difference between successful people and others is not a lack of strength, it is not a lack of knowledge, but rather it is a lack of will." Over my 20-year career in public education, I've become convinced that nothing holds public schools back more than a lack of will. In fact, if you were to simply substitute the word schools for the word people in Lombardi's famous refrain, you would understand perfectly why so many schools and school systems today remain mired in mediocrity. I'd like to illustrate this point by talking to you today about a few of my heroes. These are individuals who largely acted as lone rangers in their fight against the status quo and who were able to accomplish great advances with students, but who saw many of their efforts frustrated due to outraged citizens, cowardly politicians, and other types of frustrations. They were often frustrated by people who lacked the will to really support excellence in education. Let's start with talking about Horace Mann, lawyer, state legislator, and state superintendent of public instruction in Massachusetts. Mann is largely credited with being the founder of the Common School in America, an accomplishment that did not come easily. In order to win public support and political support for this notion of free public schools for all children, Mann and his colleagues had to fight a number of pretty tough battles. A biographer of Mann in 1936 noted that some of these battles included the battle to win tax support for schools, the battle to eliminate the pauper school idea, the battle to make schools entirely free, the battle to establish state supervision, the battle to eliminate sectarianism in schools, the battle to extend the system upward, and the battle to create a state university to crown the system. Now, despite his life's work to prevail in these battles, unfortunately, the legacy of Horace Mann is largely forgotten today due to decades of erosion of these very principles. For example, tax support of public schools today is anything but a given, with state legislatures not only refusing to raise or maintain taxes to address changing demographics and aging infrastructure in schools, but in many cases actually cutting those very taxes in response to citizen and corporate complaints. We don't call them pauper schools today, but I think we would all agree that there are poor schools all around the United States due to inequities in school funding. And students who go to those schools, unfortunately, are subjected to a host of grossly inferior learning environments and conditions. What about the battle to make schools entirely free? Well, those of us who have parents in school, or children in school, know that schools are far from free, with school fees for everything from art to music to sports to even science labs running into the hundreds of dollars. The battle to establish state supervision. State supervision today is largely an anachronism, with the federal government wresting more and more authority away from local officials every year through a variety of financial and legislative and regulatory maneuvers. Even in Mann's day, this notion of non-sectarian public schools was not one that had wide support. In fact, the Catholics were so upset about it, they split and supported or formed their own parochial school system that exists to this day. And what about our modern schools? We still face a lot of pressure from parents and others to endorse religion in schools through things such as school prayer, school clubs, or in some cases even religious instruction. In fact, just a few years ago, the South Carolina State Legislature passed a law that today allows students in that state to actually earn academic credit for release time religious classes that are taught by local Christian ministers. What about man's commitment to extend the system upward? Also in jeopardy today, as people in all seriousness advocate for the abolishment of the senior year of high school and question the merit of post-secondary education. In fact, the slippage away from man's commitment to higher education may be the most troubling of all. Over the past 15 years, states have slashed higher education budgets, and at the same time, colleges and universities have dramatically hiked tuition to make up the funding difference. In 1987, only 23% of public higher education revenue came from student tuition, with the balance coming primarily from state taxes. But in 2012, a full 48% of public higher education funding came out of the pockets of students and their parents, meaning that today's families bear almost as much of the burden of a college education as the taxpayers. This should lead us to ask the question, which we should all be asking, is education in our society today a public or private good? Surely Horace Mann would be discouraged if he saw our lack of vision and will today. Let's talk about another one of my heroes, Jaime Escalante, who rose to fame due to his appearance, or the appearance of Edward James Olmos playing him, in the 1988 movie Stand and Deliver, which chronicled Escalante's remarkable successes with Latino students at Garfield High School in East Los Angeles. As chronicled by the movie, in 1982, 18 of Escalante's advanced placement calculus students took the AP exam and passed. 14 of them were asked to retake the exam when the College Board accused them of cheating. 12 agreed to do so, and all 12 passed the second time, making Escalante somewhat of a national hero. But that was just the beginning of Escalante's success. In 1987, at the peak of his program at Garfield High School, 129 students took an AP calculus exam, and 85 of them passed. That year, only 4 high schools in America did better. And probably more importantly, many of Escalante's students went on to higher education, attending the Cal State University system or prestigious colleges like Stanford, MIT, Harvard, Yale, UCLA, etc. They also landed in very prestigious professional jobs. Thomas Valdez, one of his former students, shown here on the left, landed a plum job as an engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. Now, those who know the Escalante story well know that he was the epitome of will. He often spoke to his students and his colleagues about ganas, the Spanish word for desire. And his commitment to students was without parallel. He would often, like Lombardi, say that he was the students' coach and the students were his team. He would begin his classes by asking his students to chant things like defense, defense, to emphasize the importance of not giving up when things got hard. He would also ask them to chant BETS, a reference to the Educational Testing Service, which administered what Escalante called the Super Bowl of tests, the AP Calculus exam. But what most people don't realize is the tremendous lack of will that Escalante had to confront to do what he did in a very broken school system. He didn't even begin to teach calculus at Garfield High School until 5 years after he started there, primarily because of bureaucratic roadblocks that were put in his place. For example, in the early years at Garfield, one of the assistant principals there tried to get Escalante fired based on complaints from the custodians that Escalante was demanding to come in too early and stay too late to help students, impeding their work. On another occasion, he asked his first principal at Garfield to buy some new math textbooks so he could teach advanced math, and was told by his principal, Jaime, no, we don't do that because these books are not remedial, therefore they won't qualify for Title I funding. And oh, by the way, if you continue to insist on raising these students' math scores, we're going to lose all of our Title I funding altogether. Perhaps the biggest impediment to Escalante's work at Garfield was the complete lack of will demonstrated by his fellow teachers. Now, Escalante didn't make many friends when he called out his colleagues who were selling real estate in the teacher's lounge or calling in sick on Friday so they could have a long weekend. But what really got under his skin was the complaint of the teachers union, who carped that Escalante's large class sizes exceeded the 50-student limit that was established by the union contract. Unwilling to turn away eager students and unable to add more sections of his courses due to administrative bureaucracies, Escalante finally left Garfield High School in frustration in 1991. The tragedy is what happened to the AP Calculus program at Garfield upon Escalante's departure, left with poor teachers, an apathetic administration, and a culture that seeped of low expectations. The AP Calculus program completely disintegrated. In 2001, just 10 years after Escalante left, only 24 students passed an AP Calculus exam. Now, Escalante surely had some impact on the AP program as a whole, nationally. I think we would all agree that due to his efforts and those of many others, the AP program is much more well known today and many more students participate. But maybe not as much as you might think. For example, in 2013, none of the high schools in Canyon School District had as many students take an AP Calculus exam as the 129 who took the exam at Garfield High in 1987. Alta and Hillcrest both had 93 students take the exam. Jordan had 65 and Brighton had 56. Why is that? I would submit again to you that it is primarily for lack of will. Lack of will to change curriculum and instruction, lack of will to align systems, lack of will to prioritize math and other academics over other school activities, lack of will to adjust school schedules to accommodate the kind of support you need in a program like this, lack of will to encourage parents and students to do hard things. Finally, I think you're all aware of this beautiful young lady, Malala Yousafzai, a wonderful Pakistani girl who, because of her will to attend school with her female classmates in Pakistan, was shot at point-blank range in the face on October 9th, 2012 by Taliban terrorists who viewed the education of women as a threat to their terrible brand of radicalism. Malala, because of threats that had been made to her father and family, was well aware that violence was a real possibility. And so she had thought through how she might respond if she were assaulted. In her new book, I Am Malala, she says, "Sometimes I would imagine what I would do if a terrorist jumped out and shot me. I would think to myself, maybe I'll just take off my shoe and hit him. But then I would think if I did something like that, there would be no difference between me and the terrorist. It would be much better for me to plead, okay, shoot me, but please listen to me first. What you are doing is wrong. I have nothing personal against you. I just want every girl to go to school." What courage, what will, but again, to what end? Malala and her parents have had to flee Pakistan, probably never to return, because the government either is unable or unwilling to protect them. And in the meantime, 57 million children worldwide are out of school. So the question that I keep asking myself is why? Why are there not more Horaces, more Jaimes, more Malalas? And why do their efforts appear to be so unsustainable in public education? Well, I believe it's because when it comes to fighting the status quo in education, most of us are afraid of even our own shadow. We talk a big game, but when it comes down to real feats of courage, our actions are not very convincing. Unfortunately, too many of us end up like Galvarino, who was a tremendous Mapuche warrior in the 16th century in the south of Chile. In the year 1557, Galvarino was captured by the conquistadores and as punishment had both of his hands chopped off to send a powerful message to his people about the consequences of continuing to fight. But rather than retreat, Galvarino defiantly strapped knives to both of his stumps and continued to fight alongside his leader Caupolicán and the rest of his tribal people. Ultimately, he was worn down by the Spaniards, captured again, and hanged. Now, thankfully, those of us who have the will to demand excellence in education don't have our hands chopped off and a noose placed around our neck. But we are often asphyxiated and amputated by other weapons. What are those weapons? They are the hateful accusations on media comment boards. They are the narrow, petty politics of elected officials. And they are the selfish and short-sighted prejudices based on race and socioeconomic status. What happens all too often is that those with will in education see that will snuffed out when they realize that the only will that really exists is the will to protect the status quo and selfish adult agendas. But it doesn't have to be that way, obviously. We can improve our schools. We can improve student achievement if everyone, from political leaders to administrators to school board members to teachers to parents, will develop real will to do the right things. That, of course, starts with establishing high expectations for all students. As Escalante very eloquently said, when students of any race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status are asked to do hard work, they typically rise to the occasion, do the work, and devote themselves to the task. If we expect students to be losers, they will be losers. If we expect kids to be winners, they will be winners. We also have to have the will, as he did, to love students. And that means much more than just putting your arm around a student or telling a student that you care about him or her. It means doing the hard work day in and day out, as Escalante did, to support every student, to ensure their success and make sure that their dreams are known and realized. Finally, it means having the will to lead. And as former Prime Minister Tony Blair eloquently stated, leadership means change. So therefore, not only do we have to have the will to change things ourselves, but we have to have the will to link arms with those who would do the changing and take us to the front. This is a picture of my son Mark at a high school mountain bike race last fall. Just as he was finishing his second lap and about to go out on the third and final lap, he started to have problems with his chain, which caused him not to be able to pedal his bike, and he had to get off, turn his bike upside down, and try to fix it while we were all shouting encouragement to him from the sidelines. He eventually was able to get it somewhat fixed and got back on his bike and took off to ride the third and final lap. Well, as we waited at the finish line, the wait lasted a long time. We waited and waited and waited. And he never appeared. And finally, we were about to go to the race officials to see whether he had injured himself or fallen out on the course. And just at that point in time, he came riding slowly across the finish line, as you can see here, spent and dusty from having walked most of the last lap due to continued mechanical problems. He finished next to last out of 42 riders in his division and nearly 1 hour behind the winner of the race. I've never been more proud of one of my kids. And I like to think that he had the will to, and the grit not to quit because he himself had internalized that, but also I hope it was because he knew that adults in his life had the will to support him and see him through to the end. School improvement work is dirty, messy, and exhausting. But every one of our kids deserves our will to give them the very best in their quest for learning. Thank you.